Hello, this is the Bite Weasel, and in this video, we'll be continuing our Roblox Tycoon game. This time, we'll be focused on making sure that our scripts and our level are multiplayer friendly. So, right now, we have a single factory in our game. It works pretty well. You can stand on these buttons to produce money. The money you can use then to stand on more buttons to produce more money. So, that's a basic mechanic of the Tycoon done. But it's not very fun to play a tycoon game on your own, and right now we only have this one factory. So let's work on a system that allows us to have multiple of these factories. Now, what we could do kind of easily is just duplicate this factory, and now we've got two factories. The problem is, and you've sort of seen me mention this multiple times with the buttons and the droppers, if I happen to decide that this factory isn't finished and I duplicate something in this factory, I don't want to then have to go ahead and edit all the other existing factories because that is just annoying and I don't like doing it. So instead, we're going to come up with a system where there's only one factory. It's going to be our main template. So all the completed factories will look like this thing. So in fact, let's rename this from factory to template. This will be the only sort of factory area that we ever change. At design time in Roblox Studio, we'll come and we'll add buttons to this one and we'll move stuff around and we'll add stuff only to our template. But at runtime, this template will get copied to a bunch of areas on our level. This is really great because it means we'll only ever have to move buttons around and change stuff in one place. But then it's really easy to decide that we need more players and we'll have more spots that this template can get copied into. So let's see what that looks like. Here we have our template factory, but what we need is a place to build new factories that have the same content as our template. So let's just copy the size of this floor piece. We can sort of paste that in to the workspace as its own sort of thing in the hierarchy. And it's so big that it's hard to sort of move around. And we should have collisions turned on and make sure that it's on the ground, but I'm hitting the spawn point. So let's move this one out of the way and then move this one into position right there. So this is going to be one of the spots that our template gets copied into, but we want more than one. So let's duplicate this and let's move it here. Make sure that it is touching the ground, not underneath the ground. Whoops. Like so. So now, in theory, we have two spots that our template can get copied into, meaning that we, in theory, would support two players. So if we ever decide we want a third player, we could take this area and we could duplicate it, and now we have three plots for three players. Okay, so that's nice, but what we want to do is group all of these things up into some sort of collection. So we'll use a folder and we'll rename that folder plots. So this will be in our workspace, the areas that can be assigned a factory, right? We don't really have to call it floor. That's just the copy that came out of the factory. We can give them names that help us remember where they are in our level or whatever. It doesn't really matter. So plot 1, 2, and 3 from left to right. Plot 1, plot 2, plot 3. Okay, now we need to essentially in a script somewhere loop through all of these and copy the template onto it. So let's see how we would do that. We already have an existing factory script, and so we can use this to sort of do that template copying for us. So to do that, the first thing that we're going to want is to get a reference to those plots that we have in that folder there. So to do that, we'll go workspace dot find first child, the name of the folder, which is plots, and then we'll get the children from that folder. So that will give us these three plots in there. Then what we're going to want to do is a for loop that loops through each one of those plots. And for each one of those plots, we basically want to copy the template. So let's also get a reference to that template, which is workspace find first child template. Now, what we're going to want to do is on the template, there is a function called clone. This will basically create a copy of that model along with all of its different children. So this line of code will loop through the plot, and for each plot, copy that template. Now, when we do copy that template, it will appear, well, nowhere originally, because when you call clone, it creates a copy of it, but it doesn't add it into the hierarchy anywhere. So we'll need to put it in the hierarchy. But once we do that, it will actually be positioned here, and we need to move it to each one of the plots. So plot 1 should go here, plot 2, the clone should move here, and plot 3, the clone should move here. So let's do both of those things. First, clone.parent equals the workspace. So that will put it in the workspace and be visible. But we don't want to do that first. We sort of want to do that last. So get everything ready and then make it visible. So how do we move it? Well, we're going to take the clone and we're going to use a function called pivot2. And this function basically takes the pivot point of the object and moves it to whatever location you specify. And the location has to be specified as a C-frame. Now, if you're not familiar what a C-frame is, it's used all over in Roblox, but it's basically a construct that contains a position and a rotation of something in the world. So it's a bit more complicated than that, but you can sort of imagine it as the position of something in the world as well as which direction it's facing. And so we want to move our clone to the position of the particular plot that we're looking at. So pivot to the plots pivot, right? So basically, they end up being exactly the same. Move the clones pivot to the plots pivot. So now if we take a look at what this is doing, we should see that the template has been cloned and it's moved into each 3 of these spots. And already you're looking at this and you're saying, well, that's not what's happened at all. And you're right. Because what has happened is we do have these clone templates right here, and they have moved into the right position. Sorry, that's the original one. But you can see that plot 1, template 1 is there. Plot 2 seems to be there. And I guess this one is then plot 3 over there. But they're sort of underground. So we need to fix that. And we also sort of need to fix these names, because right now they're all the same, which is very, very confusing. So let's go back here and fix those 2 things. The first one is really easy. Clone.name equals, and then we can give it a name. So let us use the name of the plot that we are in, that we are, sort of moving the clone to, but combine it with the word factory, I guess. So it'll be factory plot 1, factory plot 2, and factory plot 3. As we go through those plots. So that's really easy to do. The second thing is not too difficult either. The problem is the clone's pivot point is not really set to what we want it to. So if we go back and look here at the template, which I guess is all the way over there. Oh, I'm still playing. Sorry, let me stop that. The template over here, the pivot point really in Roblox Studio is sort of calculated right here, but at runtime, that might not be the case. It depends on how it sort of renders these things. But you can set it to be the case. So what we want to do is in the template, go down to the option called pivot, and under there's a primary part. And what you can do there is set which of these children objects you sort of want to be the primary part that everything else is relative to. So the floor is a good one for this, because what we've done in our plots is we've copied that floor. So we really want to move the floor of the template to the floor of this, and then everything should line up. So Back to here. Now that line of code should work. Moving the clone's pivot point to the plot's pivot point should work. Let's test it really quick. We can press play and we can look now that this has worked perfectly. So we have, if I open this here, factory plot 1 is right here. Factory plot 2 is in 2, where we'd expect it. And factory plot 3 is over in 3. And because of the way that we're cloning the entire template, it means that our buttons are still linked up to the cloned version of the dropper that we have. So if you remember, the buttons are sort of linked to their dropper using this object value, and that object value, if I go to it, is also going to be part of that clone, which is why it all sort of works right now. Now, the problem is, if you're looking down here with sharp eye, you might see that we're getting errors. And that's because the code that assigns the player one of these plots no longer works because we haven't updated that code yet. So none of this button works, but it does look good. Let's fix that. The first thing that we're going to want to do, I think, is make a new place for these factories to go. So we can add a new folder, and we'll rename it, and we'll call it Factories. Okay, and instead of cramming them directly in the workspace, we'll put them under that Factories folder. So that's going to keep it a bit neater. Now the cloned factories will live under that Factories folder. And down here, when a player connects, instead of doing this line of code, which is how we originally set the owner to the factory, we need to rewrite this. For one, we don't have a single factory anymore. We renamed it template, and we're not using that in the same way anymore. And we've got multiples of these things now. So let's not do that. Instead, what we're going to do is loop through the factories and assign the owner attribute to the first one that is 0. Does that even make sense? I think it's a bit backwards, but let's see what we come up with. So this is going to loop through all of those children under factories, which is exactly what we want. And then it's going to check that the factory has no owner, like it's set to 0. And then if it is set to 0, we're going to set it to the first user ID, the user ID of the one that joined, the player that joined. And then we're going to break out of the loop, which means we find the first one that's set to 0 and we assign it. So this actually did work really well. So that's cool. We didn't even have to write that. Roblox Studio wrote it for us. So let's see if it works. So if it does work, what we should see is 3 cloned factories under this factory folder, which we do. And we should see that at least one of them has my user ID as the owner. And this one doesn't, and this one doesn't. So now it should mean that here I should be able to stand on a button because I own this factory, and I should not be able to stand on this button because I do not own this factory. Yeah, there you go. So that doesn't work, which is exactly what we want. It not working actually means it's working. So there you go. It's working now in terms of having multiple factories, which is really neat because what this means, and you've probably gathered this already, is we can go and sort of design our level however we want. We can move these plots around. We can have them like in a semicircle or something instead of, a direct line. And we can go away and make terrain and add trees and update the grass and all sorts of stuff. And all we need to do is position those things. We don't need to add buttons. We don't need to add droppers. If we want to customize it, we just come over to our template right here and we do all the customization in this piece. So for example, if I took this button and this dropper and let's double check that this is working, duplicate these things and move them over here and move them over here and sort of maybe update the cost of those buttons with these properties. Maybe that one's 700 and the last one there is, I don't know, 1,000. You can, of course, go away and figure out the costs of things a little better when you do it. But this just gives you an idea. All we've done is update the template here And if I play now, we should see, oh my gosh, every single factory is now cloned and it is in the new position that we set, and they all have 4 buttons, which means it's going to take us a lot less time to like update our factory and make our game work because the code is doing it all for us, putting them in the right place, it's cloning everything, and it's assigning the stuff. So I think that's pretty neat. It's a good pattern to use. And yeah, so that works great. So now we have a position, I guess 3 positions for 3 different players play the game. I'm actually going to put these back because it's a bit confusing having them all the way behind me. So we'll just leave them there. But you can go away and decide what it should look like in your Tycoon game. Okay, so this is really good. And we can actually test that it works with multiple people. So let's do that. Now, if you're not aware, you can go to this test tab, which I think I already had open for some reason. And you can select this drop down for the number of players you sort of want to emulate. And it goes up to quite a large amount, but we're just going to pick 2. And then we're going to use this start button instead of sort of the play button that is elsewhere. If you use this start button next to the number of players, what this is going to do is actually spawn a brand new instance of Roblox Studio as the server, and then it's going to spawn more instances of Roblox Studio that are the number of players that you wanted from the dropdown. So we picked 2, so it spawned 2 players. And you can see here on the left, I have player 1 that I can move around. And you can see that's player 1 because player 2 isn't moving. And on player 2's screen, you can see my name above the head. So this is player 1 that we can move around. And this is player 2 that we can move around. So in theory, what we should be able to do is not stand on player 1 button, because I assume this factory is assigned to player 1. So let's take a look if that's true. Yeah, see, this has been given to player 1, and I can confirm that by sort of looking in this factory, finding plot 1, and scrolling down to the owner. Now, because this is a local multiplayer test, these user IDs are negative numbers, and it's -1 for player 1, and it's -2 for player 2. So you can see that this one is assigned to player 1, and it looks like plot 3 has been assigned to player 2. So if player 2 wanders over to plot 3, it shouldn't be able to press this button because it doesn't own it, but it should be able to press this button over here. Yay! So you sort of get assigned a random plot depending on what order it's looping through the plots in your workspace. So you could fix that with a number if you wanted player 1 to be on 1 and player 2 to be on 2, but because people are going to be joining and leaving, it's probably not too much of a big deal. So that works great for multiplayer. The problem is going to be when someone leaves. So if player 2 was to exit the game, and before I do that though, look, you can see the money is working. In the scoreboard here, player 2, can spend money, and it updates this, and player 1 is earning money over here, and it's all working. But now if I was to exit the game for player 2, that's gone. But if player 1 looks over there, you can see, oh, the factory is still there. Even though the player that had been assigned this factory has gone, factory doesn't know that, and it's still sort of working. So we need a way of knowing when someone leaves to sort of clean up this factory and get it ready for the next player to join. So let's see how we can do that. I close these things down and go back to our scripts. So in our scripts, we have this player added event, but we don't yet know when a player leaves. So this is pretty straightforward though. What we can do is copy this pattern. So the player's service has a player removing event that we can hook up to. So we connect to that event. We get a function that gets a player given to it for the player that's leaving. And then here we can find it sort of suggested probably what we need to do. We look through the factories, and when we find the matching owner, we then set it to 0. So this is really good. Thanks, Roblox Studio. Um, it's almost the exact opposite of what we were doing in the Connect. So we look through all the factories, and instead of finding the first empty factory, we find the factory that was assigned to the player that's leaving, and then we sort of set it back to 0 and then exit. So that will be good. Now that factory will be assigned to 0, so the next person joining could actually be assigned to that factory. But the problem is it's still going to run, right? There's nothing in this code that says that factory should be, everything on it should stop, unpurchased, like the button should reset, all that stuff. That's not in there. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. But I think the easiest way for us is to just destroy that factory and then reclone it. I think that should be the easiest way. So what that would look like is in here, when we've identified which factory it is, we can literally just go factory destroy. And that will delete that cloned factory. And then we're going to need to reclone it into this particular plot, right? So to clone a factory, it looks like this. So let us take this code and move it into a function that we can call. So if I remove that and I do local function clone plot, and it gets sent in a plot, we can paste that in. Okay, that's going to take the template and clone it and move it into whatever plot you assign it. So if I call now in our existing loop, clone plot and send in the plot, that's going to work. And we want to do something very similar down here. So we destroy the factory, and then we want to clone it back into that plot. The problem is we don't know which plot we just destroyed, because we destroyed one of the factories. We didn't actually destroy, we don't actually have a reference to the plot that the factory is positioned on, right? So we need a way of linking those two things up. And we could use object values. That's definitely a way that we could do it. But I think there is another way that we could also use. So I think what we'll do is we'll just, instead of using an object value and storing stuff in the hierarchy, we'll just add a new list up here called factories as a table. And then what we'll do is when we clone a plot, we'll basically set our factories list to have that new factory, which is the clone, set to the plot that it came from. Right? So this is now going to be a table that has the cloned factories in it, and the value of that cloned factory in that table is going to be the plot that it came from. I think this makes sense. So if we go down here, how we look up that plot is before we destroy the factory, we should say factory, because that's the one that we stored in the table, and get the plot from that, right? And then we can clone it after we destroy it, because that is going to match up to the plot that the factory came from. And then we should remove this from our table. So we grab the plot that the factory came from, and we get rid of it from the table, and then we clone it. Is this going to work? Let's find out by going back to that test and starting a new game with 2 players. So again, this is going to start a server, Roblox Studio, and then it's going to join 2 players into it. So here we go. Let's just try player 1. So player 2 can have a look to see what's happening, but player 1 has built this factory and it has done something, and now player 1 is going to leave. Hopefully what we see, and it happens really fast, is that that factory gets destroyed and then a new one comes in its place, which should be, if we've done it right, assigned to nobody. So that looks good. And I think if we joined another person back in, they should be correctly assigned either that factory or one of the others. So how you can do that is go back to the server that got spawned, which is the one behind here, and select from the drop-down the number of players that you want to rejoin, which is slightly different from the original, which is how many players it should connect to this server. Because we're using it on the server, not the original one, it's going to be slightly different. So we're going to rejoin one player. If I press that start button next to this, we should see, if I move it over, that we have now player 2 who remains in the game over here. And now this guy, who is in fact player 3. Look, if I stand over here, you can see that it's player 3. So a new player joined, player 3. Let's see if player 3 was assigned that same factory. Nope, not that one. It was actually assigned the second one. Fine. That's going to work just fine. So player 3 comes over here. He owns this factory, so, we can stand on these things. And then if player 3 leaves, and I guess player 4 joins, at least it's used the right window this time. Player 4, yep, we're player 4. Player 4 has been given factory 1 again. So it is working. Like this one was player 1 originally, and now player 4 has it because player 1 left, and it's up for grabs once again. So it is working. So that's cool, and that's how you can use Roblox sort of local multiplayer to test that your multiplayer game works without needing to publish the game, without needing to like set up collaboration and all that sort of stuff. You just do it local on your machine. Yeah, so that's really neat. Let's take a look at what we've accomplished. So we took our existing factory and we moved it into a template over here. We basically renamed it, and everything else is pretty much the same. But we can now take that template and copy it into a plot position on our world. And the code to do that, of course, we wrote in our factory script. It's essentially this function, the clone plot function that we made, where you pass in the plot or the place, really, the object that you want to position the new factory into. It makes a copy of the template factory and then it moves it. And we do that when the script first starts up to fill in all those plots under this folder. But we also do the same cloning behavior when a player leaves. So when a player leaves, we sort of destroy the old factory and make a new clone of it. So it's ready for the next person to pick it up. And in fact, if you look at this code, we no longer need to set the attribute of the owner to 0 because the next line we immediately destroy it. So this is actually redundant. It's going to pick up the owner 0 from when it clones the template anyway. So a new cloned plot will always be 0, so we don't need to reset it really. But when the player joins, we do need to assign them a factory by looping through all of those existing factories, finding the first one that has no owner and giving them ownership. And because of the way that we created the rest of our scripts, they check for that sort of owner permission before they allow people to press buttons and stuff. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's what we ended up with. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, leave a comment, ring that notification bell, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.